C.O. Park stood at his penthouse window, the Manhattan skyline a glittering canvas behind him. His attention, however, wasn't on the million-dollar view but on the small screen of his phone. His dark eyes narrowed as he watched the security footage from the hallway outside his kitchen. On screen, Portia moved with quiet efficiency, carrying fresh linens toward the guest rooms. Then it happened, the moment he'd caught himself rewatching more times than he cared to admit. The soft strains of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake drifted through the penthouse speakers, and Portia froze mid-step. For 3 heartbeats, her body swayed ever so slightly, muscle memory responding to music that clearly lived inside her. Then, like a candle being snuffed out, awareness returned. Her shoulders stiffened, and a flash of pain crossed her face, not physical pain, but something deeper. She squared her shoulders and continued walking, her limp barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't looking for it. C.O. clicked his phone off and slipped it into his pocket. He had important business calls to make, deals to oversee, threats to neutralize. He had no business watching his housekeeper's private moments of grief. Yet something about the way she carried her loss intrigued him. It reminded him of something he recognized all too well. You know that feeling when something stops you in your tracks? That's what this story is about to do to you. If you want to discover what happens when shattered dreams and unspoken feelings collide, smash that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. 6 months earlier, Portia Swan had been a different person altogether. 5, 6, 7, 8. The choreographer's voice echoed through the studio as Portia executed a series of turns that made the other dancers stop to watch. Her body told stories that words couldn't capture, each movement flowing into the next with a precision that seemed impossible for someone so young. That's it, Portia. Hold that tension in the final pose, yes. Ms. Reynolds, the company director, clapped her hands. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Everyone take 5, then we'll run it from the top. Portia grabbed her water bottle, chest heaving from exertion but her face glowing. Allison, another dancer, bumped her shoulder playfully. Save some talent for the rest of us, why don't you? She teased. You know they're grooming you for principal. Youngest in company history. Portia shook her head, but couldn't help smiling. Nothing's official. Besides, I've got so much work to do on that second transition. The New York Times called you transcendent last month, Allison reminded her. Your career is about to explode, girl. Portia laughed. Let me get through this season first. Then I'll worry about exploding. But explosions come in many forms. Later that night, Portia hailed a cab on Amsterdam Avenue, her dance bag slung over her shoulder. She'd stayed late to work on that troublesome transition, determined to make it perfect. The choreography for the spring showcase would be her biggest opportunity yet, a featured solo designed specifically for her abilities. Derek was waiting at their apartment with takeout and a movie, and the thought of curling up with her fiancé after a long day made her smile. The cab's headlights illuminated the raindrops as they pulled away from the curb. Portia leaned her head against the window, muscles pleasantly sore from the day's work. The driver chatted about the weather as they moved through the intersection. She never saw the other car. Just heard the screech of tires, felt the violent jerk as metal collided with metal. The world spun, glass shattered, and pain exploded through her right leg. Her last conscious thought was of the showcase, and how she couldn't afford to be injured right now. Then darkness. Miss Swan? Can you hear me? The voice pierced through layers of fog. Portia blinked against harsh fluorescent lights, confusion washing over her. Her mouth felt like cotton, her body disconnected from her brain. A doctor in a white coat stood beside her bed, his expression carefully neutral. You're at Mount Sinai Hospital. You were in an accident 3 days ago. 3 days? Portia tried to sit up, but pain shot through her right leg, so intense that black spots danced before her eyes. Please don't try to move yet, the doctor said gently. Your right leg was severely injured in the crash. It was fractured in 4 places, and we had to perform emergency surgery to repair the damage. Portia stared at him, the words not fully registering. "But I have rehearsal tomorrow," she said, her voice scratchy from disuse. "We're 6 weeks from opening night." The doctor's expression softened with pity, and that's when Portia knew. That look, she'd seen it before, when her mother got sick. It was the look that said life as you knew it was over. "Miss Swan, I need to be honest with you. The surgeries were successful and that you will walk again, but the damage to your leg." He paused, choosing his words carefully. The bone and muscle damage was extensive. "With intensive physical therapy, you will regain mobility, but professional dancing at your level, I'm sorry, but that won't be possible." The words hit her like another car crash. Not possible. Dance was all she knew, all she'd ever wanted. At 24, she'd been on the verge of everything she'd worked for since she was a little girl in her first pair of ballet shoes. "There must be some mistake," she whispered. "I can work harder in PT, I can." "The man who hit you ran a red light," the doctor continued quietly. "His blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit. He walked away with minor bruising." "I'm so sorry." Derek stayed by her side through those first terrible weeks. He helped her navigate the insurance paperwork, the police reports, the painkillers that made her feel like she was underwater. He held her when she cried, which was often. He promised they'd get through this together. Until they didn't. 3 months after the accident, Portia sat on the edge of her bed, struggling to pull on compression socks before physical therapy. Her leg ached constantly, a dull throb punctuated by sharp stabs when she moved wrong. The dancer's body she'd once inhabited, strong, responsive, extraordinary, now felt like a prison. "I can't do this anymore," Derek said from the doorway. Portia looked up, sock dangling from her fingers. "What?" "This." He gestured vaguely between them. "Us. You're not the same person, Portia. You're angry all the time. You don't laugh anymore. You barely talk to me." "My career is over," she said quietly. "Everything I worked for my entire life is gone. And I've tried to be there for you, but it's like you're not even trying to find a new path. You just want to live in what might have been." The truth of his words stung worse than her leg ever could. By Sunday morning, Derek had packed his things and disappeared from her life, taking with him the engagement ring and her belief that love could survive the hard seasons. Without her salary from the dance company, money vanished quickly. Medical bills piled up. Rent in Harlem waited for no one. Soon, Portia was moving from friend's couch to friend's couch, her belongings in a storage unit she could barely afford. She tried working as an administrator at a dance studio, thinking proximity to her former world might ease the ache. But sitting at a desk while others danced in the next room felt like watching someone else eat while she starved. 2 weeks in, she stopped showing up. Rock bottom arrived on a Thursday evening in March, 10 months after the accident. Portia sat in a Brooklyn coffee shop, nursing a cup she could barely afford, scrolling through job listings on a phone with a cracked screen. Her bank account held $89. Her storage unit was 3 days from auction. The former rising star could barely see a way forward. Then the listing appeared. Private household manager needed. Live-in position. $17,000 monthly. Discretion paramount. Background in service industry not required. Portia stared at the screen. The salary was suspicious. The vague language concerning. The requirement for discretion screamed that something wasn't right. But desperation has a way of reframing red flags into welcome signs. The interview took place in a midtown office with no company name on the door. A man who introduced himself only as Mr. Yoon asked questions that would have made the old Portia walk out immediately. "Do you have family who will worry about your whereabouts?" he asked, his expression unreadable. "No," Portia answered honestly. Her parents had died years ago, and she'd lost touch with most friends since the accident. "Are you comfortable with irregular schedules and unusual requests?" "Yes." What choice did she have? Can you exist in a space without needing explanations for what you observe? The old Portia would have demanded to know what that meant. This version, the one who had learned that the universe takes without asking, simply nodded. "You'll start Monday," Mr. Yoon said, sliding a thick envelope across the desk. "This contains your first week's salary in advance and the address. Arrive at 9 a.m. sharp. Pack everything you wish to bring. You won't be returning to your current residence." 2 days later, Portia stood in the private elevator ascending to the 61st floor of a glass tower overlooking the Hudson River. Her few remaining possessions fit into 2 suitcases. The advance payment had been enough to clear her storage unit and buy a few basics. Whatever awaited her above couldn't be worse than what she was leaving behind. The elevator doors slid open to reveal a foyer of polished marble and indirect lighting. The silence was complete, almost textured. Portia wheeled her suitcases onto the marble, the sound jarringly loud in the stillness. "Leave those. Someone will handle them." The voice came from beyond an archway leading to what appeared to be a living room. Portia followed the sound, her practical shoes clicking against the floor. The room opened to floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Manhattan like a living painting. Standing with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, was a man whose presence seemed to command even the air around him. He didn't turn when she entered. He simply stood there, backlit by the city skyline like a figure from a painting. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured, each word placed with surgical precision. "You were a dancer." It wasn't a question. Portia's blood ran cold. "I research everyone who enters my home," he continued, still facing the windows. Alvin Ailey. Rising star. Career ended by a drunk driver who walked away with a suspended license and community service. He paused. "The justice system failed you." Portia said nothing. Her throat had closed around words that refused to form. The man finally turned. His face was all sharp angles and controlled stillness, his dark eyes assessing her with a calculation that made her want to step back. He couldn't be much older than 35, but something about him felt ancient, weathered. A crisp white shirt revealed hints of tattoos creeping up from beneath his collar, like secrets trying to escape. "I am C.O. Park," he said. "This penthouse is your workplace and now your home. Your quarters are in the West Wing. You will find them comfortable." Portia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "I have one rule," C.O. continued. "My private office on the East Wing is forbidden. You do not enter. You do not approach. You do not acknowledge its existence. Break this rule and you will be removed. Not harmed. Simply erased from this place as though you never existed. Understood?" Portia understood more than he realized. She understood that this man operated in a world where rules meant survival. She understood that the penthouse, for all its luxury, was a gilded cage for someone running from something too. "Understood," she replied, finding her voice at last. C.O. nodded once, as if closing a business deal. "Mr. Yoon has explained your duties. Your schedule will be left each morning in the kitchen. I expect excellence, Ms. Swan. I believe you are still capable of that, even if in a different form than you once imagined." Something in his words, not pity, but acknowledgement, made Portia stand straighter. "Yes, Mr. Park." As C.O. walked past her toward what she would later learn was his private wing, Portia made a decision. This strange job in this luxurious prison might not be what she'd dreamed of, but it was a lifeline when she was drowning. She would grab it with both hands and use it to rebuild herself, piece by broken piece. She had no way of knowing that the man who just hired her would be watching that rebuilding with growing fascination, or that his interest would change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows as Portia moved methodically through the penthouse. 3 weeks into her new position, she had already established a comfortable routine. The space demanded perfection, and providing that gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since the accident. Each morning began at 5:30 a.m. She would rise, complete her stretching routine, modified from her dance warm-ups, and prepare for the day ahead. By 6:15, she'd be in the kitchen preparing C.O.'s morning tea, arranging the newspaper beside it, and setting out a light breakfast he rarely touched. He appeared at precisely 6:30, regardless of when he had gone to bed the night before. Their morning interactions followed a script neither had discussed but both understood. He would nod in acknowledgement, she would step back, hands clasped before her. Sometimes he would mention a schedule change or special request. Mostly, silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but deliberate, like a buffer zone they both needed. Today, CO paused at the kitchen island, scanning the newspaper headlines while sipping his tea. "There will be a meeting at 2, he said without looking up. 5 guests. Prepare refreshments in the conference room." "Yes, Mr. Park." "Will they be staying for dinner?" "No." He set down his cup with such precision it made no sound against the saucer. "And Portia?" She looked up, surprised at the use of her first name. "Make yourself scarce during the meeting." It wasn't a request. At exactly 2 p.m., the elevator announced visitors with a soft chime. Portia, who had just finished arranging a tray of refreshments in the conference room, slipped out through the service entrance. She caught glimpses of the men as they arrived, all Korean, all dressed in expensive suits that couldn't quite hide their muscular builds. One carried a sleek laptop case, another had a briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. They moved with the cautious respect of soldiers approaching a general. When CO emerged from his wing to greet them, Portia noticed how their postures changed, back straightening, eyes lowering slightly. Even the oldest among them, a man with silver at his temples, bowed his head when CO approached. The conference room doors closed, but Portia could hear the low murmur of voices as she moved through her afternoon tasks. Occasionally, someone would raise their voice, rapid Korean flowing like water over rocks. Then CO would speak, his tone measured but with an edge that silenced the others immediately. Power. That's what she witnessed. Not the showy kind that needed validation, but the quiet certainty of someone who never questioned his authority. Back in her private quarters, a surprisingly spacious suite with its own sitting area, bedroom, and luxurious bathroom, Portia changed into leggings and a loose t-shirt. The meeting would last at least another hour. This was her time. She cleared the center of the room, pushing the coffee table aside to create an open space on the plush carpet. Physical therapy had ended months ago when her insurance ran out, but Portia had memorized the exercises, adding modifications from her dance training. She knew she'd never perform professionally again, but maintaining mobility and strength had become its own kind of discipline. Starting with gentle stretches, she worked her way through the routine. Her right leg protested as always, the surgically repaired bones and muscles groaning their discontent. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she progressed to more challenging movements, balancing on her good leg while carefully extending the injured one. "Come on," she whispered to herself, holding a modified arabesque. "Just 10 more seconds." Her leg trembled with effort, but she held the position, eyes fixed on a spot on the wall. When she finally lowered her leg, satisfaction warmed her chest. One more small victory in a war she fought daily. What Portia didn't know was that she wasn't alone in her triumph. In his private office, the room forbidden to her, CO Park sat at his desk, one eye on financial reports and the other on the small monitor displaying security feeds from throughout the penthouse. The camera in Portia's quarters had been installed like all the others, long before she arrived. He'd never had reason to look at that particular feed until a week ago, when curiosity about his new employee got the better of him. Now, it had become something of a habit. Not voyeurism, he respected her privacy too much for that, but a fascination with her determination. He only watched during her exercise time, impressed by the methodical way she pushed her limits. CO minimized the window as his phone buzzed with a message. Business never waited, especially his kind of business. But for those few minutes each day, watching Portia fight her private battle reminded him of something he'd nearly forgotten, the quiet dignity of perseverance. Days turned to weeks as Portia settled more deeply into her role. She learned CO's preferences without being told, how he liked his clothes arranged by color rather than type, how he preferred fresh flowers in the living area but never in his private wing, how he drank tea in the morning but switched to filtered water after noon. CO, in turn, found himself increasingly aware of Portia's presence, even when she wasn't in the room. It was in the small touches she added to the penthouse, the way she arranged seasonal blooms in a ceramic vase he'd forgotten he owned, how she'd placed a small dish of sea salt beside the stove because she'd noticed he reached for it when he occasionally cooked, the way the towels were folded in perfect thirds rather than halves. She moved through the space with an economy of movement that spoke of her dancer's training. No wasted steps, no unnecessary gestures. Even with her slight limp, she maintained a grace that transformed mundane tasks into something almost choreographed. One Thursday afternoon, CO returned unexpectedly early from a business meeting to find Portia arranging flowers in the entryway. She hadn't heard him enter, and for a moment, he simply watched her work. Her hands moved with practiced precision, turning the stems just so, stepping back to assess the arrangement from different angles. Her face in these unguarded moments was different, focused yet peaceful, as if arranging tulips and eucalyptus was as important as any performance she'd ever given. When she sensed his presence and turned, the mask of professional detachment slipped back into place so quickly he almost doubted what he'd seen. "Mr. Park. I didn't hear you come in." "Clearly." He nodded toward the flowers. "You have an eye for composition." Surprise flickered across her face at the unexpected compliment. "Thank you. I just finished the rest of today's tasks." CO nodded and continued toward his office, aware that something had shifted between them, however slightly. It was the first personal observation he'd shared with her, an acknowledgement of her as something more than hired help. As weeks became months, Portia began noticing things about CO's business that raised questions she knew better than to ask. Documents in Korean left briefly on the dining table before being whisked away. Conversations that ceased the moment she entered a room. Visitors who arrived after midnight, their faces tense, sometimes sporting bruises or bandaged hands. Once, she found a handgun on the bathroom counter while cleaning CO's guest bathroom after one such late-night meeting. She simply worked around it, pretending it wasn't there, and when she returned later, it had vanished. The forbidden office remained a mystery, but Portia had her suspicions. The bits of conversations she overheard, the way money appeared and disappeared, the deference of visitors who looked more like soldiers than businessmen, it painted a picture she tried not to examine too closely. Whatever CO Park did, it operated in shadows. What surprised her was that she wasn't afraid. Whatever his business, CO treated her with a respect she hadn't experienced since before the accident. He never raised his voice, never made inappropriate requests, never treated her as less than professional. The boundaries between them were clear and, in their own way, comforting. Until the night those boundaries collapsed, if only for a moment. 6 months into her employment, Portia was preparing dinner while CO worked in the living room. He had been on phone calls all day, his voice occasionally rising in rare displays of frustration. She'd learned to read his moods by now, the slight tightening around his eyes when he was displeased, the almost imperceptible tap of his index finger when he was impatient. Tonight, tension radiated from him like heat from a furnace. He'd abandoned his usual spot at his desk and was pacing before the windows, phone pressed to his ear as he spoke rapid-fire Korean. From his tone, Portia gathered that someone had made a significant mistake. She prepared his favorite meal without being asked, a simple but perfectly executed bibimbap with extra gochujang on the side. It wasn't until she reached her quarters that she realized what had been strange about their interaction. CO had said, "I know," about her pushing herself too hard. But how could he know unless he had been watching her? And why did the thought send a shiver down her spine that wasn't entirely unpleasant? 3 days after the tray incident, Portia opened her door to find a stranger standing in the penthouse living room. The woman was in her 50s, with short salt and pepper hair and the lean, muscular build of someone who understood bodies professionally. "Ah, there you are," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Elaine Cho." "You must be Portia." Confused, Portia shook the woman's hand. "Yes, but I'm sorry, I don't understand." "Ms. Swan." CO's voice came from the kitchen where he stood preparing tea, a rare sight in itself. Dr. Cho is one of the top physical therapists in the country. She specializes in dance injuries and rehabilitation. Portia stiffened. "I don't recall requesting a physical therapist." I did, Co said simply, bringing 3 cups of tea to the sitting area. Your leg. The incident with the tray demonstrated that you require professional attention. Heat rose to Portia's cheeks. That was a momentary lapse. It won't happen again. Dr. Cho looked between them, a small smile playing on her lips. Perhaps we could discuss this sitting down. I've brought some equipment that might help. Co gestured to the sofa, his expression unreadable. Dr. Cho will visit twice weekly. I've cleared your schedule accordingly. Mr. Park, Portia began, keeping her voice level despite her rising frustration. While I appreciate the thought, I don't need. I need you at your physical best, Co interrupted, his tone making it clear the matter wasn't up for discussion. This is a professional requirement, not charity. Something in his eyes told a different story, but Portia knew better than to challenge him in front of a visitor. She sat reluctantly, placing her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling with unexpected emotion. Dr. Cho, seemingly oblivious to the tension, set her bag on the coffee table. I've reviewed your medical records, quite a complex repair they did on that leg. Tell me about your current maintenance routine. As Portia described her daily exercises, Co quietly excused himself, leaving the women to their consultation. The moment the door to his wing closed, Dr. Cho raised an eyebrow. Interesting employer you have. He values efficiency, Portia said carefully. Dr. Cho didn't look convinced. He flew me in from California, you know. First class. Said you deserved the best care available. Portia blinked in surprise. He said that? Not in those exact words. More like, I require the optimal rehabilitation program for my employee. But people say a lot in how they say things. Dr. Cho tapped her clipboard. Now, show me that arabesque you mentioned. Let's see where we're starting from. By the end of the 2-hour session, Portia's leg ached in new and promising ways. Dr. Cho had identified several compensation patterns Portia had developed and provided modifications to her routine that would strengthen rather than strain her injured muscles. Same time Thursday, Dr. Cho said, packing her equipment. And Portia? Whatever Mr. Park's reasons for bringing me here, take advantage. That leg has potential we can work with. After the doctor left, Portia found Co in the kitchen, reviewing documents. Thank you, she said simply. He nodded without looking up. It's a business expense. Of course. Portia turned to leave. She's the same therapist who worked with Mikhail Baryshnikov after his injury, Co added, still not looking at her. I did my research. The casual mention of one of dance's greatest legends, and his famous comeback from injury, wasn't lost on Portia. It was the closest Co had come to acknowledging that he saw her as more than just his housekeeper. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and retreated to her quarters. That night, Portia's muscles protested the new exercises, keeping her awake past midnight. After tossing in bed for an hour, she decided to make some chamomile tea. Opening her door quietly, she was surprised to find a small tray on the floor outside her room. On it sat a ceramic teapot, still warm, and a handwritten note in elegant script, for muscle tension and sleep. Drink while hot. The tea had a complex flavor, floral with hints of valerian and something she couldn't identify. Within 20 minutes of finishing the cup, her muscles relaxed, and sleep came easily. The next morning, Co made no mention of the tea, and Portia didn't ask. But when she struggled to sleep the following night after another intense therapy session, another pot appeared, as if by magic. Their unspoken communication continued this way for weeks. Portia would find small, thoughtful accommodations for her comfort, a cushion placed on her usual chair, a footrest appearing in the kitchen where she prepared meals. She never saw Co place these items, and he never acknowledged doing so. In return, Portia found subtle ways to reciprocate. She learned that Co preferred classical music in the mornings but jazz in the evenings, and adjusted the penthouse's sound system accordingly. She noticed which books he lingered over in his collection and made sure they were prominently displayed. Small gestures that acknowledged they were becoming attuned to each other's presence. A month after Dr. Cho's first visit, New York was hit with an unseasonable storm. Rain lashed against the windows of the penthouse, and lightning illuminated the skyline in brilliant flashes. Portia had just finished preparing dinner when the lights flickered, then went out completely. Emergency generators immediately activated dim lighting in the hallways, but the main living areas remained dark. Portia found candles in a drawer and had just begun lighting them when CO emerged from his office. "Power grids down across half of Manhattan," he said, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Generators will maintain essential systems, but we're on limited power for the night." Portia nodded, placing candles strategically around the room. The flickering lights softened the penthouse's modern edges, creating pools of golden illumination against the darkness. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, a strange serenity settled over them. "I've prepared dinner," Portia said. "It should still be hot." "Bring it here," CO said, gesturing to the coffee table. No point in sitting separately in the dark. The request, the first time he'd suggested they share a meal, caught Portia off guard. She brought 2 plates to the living area, setting them on the table with careful precision. They ate in silence at first, the storm providing a dramatic backdrop to the unusual scene. Candlelight played across CO's features, softening the sharp angles of his face. Without the harsh overhead lighting, he looked younger, less severe. "The storm reminds me of Jeju Island," CO said unexpectedly, breaking their silence. "Where I grew up. The sea would get angry like this, beating against the cliffs." Portia looked up in surprise. In 6 months, this was the first personal detail he'd shared about his background. "Is your family still there?" she asked carefully. Something crossed his face, a shadow of old pain. "No. My parents died when I was 14. Fishing accident." "I'm sorry," Portia said softly. "Mine passed too. Cancer took my mother when I was 16, and my father had a heart attack 2 years later." CO studied her face in the flickering light. "So we both understand what it is to reinvent ourselves after loss." The observation hung between them, unexpectedly intimate. "Did you dance as a child?" he asked, changing the subject slightly. Portia smiled, memories warming her despite the storm outside. "From the moment I could walk. My mother found me trying to spin in circles in my crib. She put me in classes when I was 4, and it just clicked. Like my body had found what it was meant to do." She glanced down at her leg. "I never imagined doing anything else." "And now?" The question wasn't cruel, just direct, like everything about CO. "And now I'm learning that life has backup plans, even when we don't," she replied. "The physical therapy is helping. I'll never perform professionally again, but movement is still part of me." Lightning flashed, illuminating the room momentarily. In that stark light, Portia caught an expression on CO's face she hadn't seen before, something almost like admiration. "My uncle took me in after my parents died," CO continued, surprising her again with this voluntary information. "He had a business in Seoul. Not a kind man, but he taught me to survive. By 18, I was running part of his operation. By 25, I had my own." Portia nodded, understanding he was offering these fragments as a rare gift. She didn't need to know the nature of that operation to recognize the pattern of someone who had risen from trauma through grit and determination. "Did you ever want something different?" she asked. CO's laugh was so unexpected it made her blink. "As a child, I wanted to design buildings. I would make models out of whatever I could find, driftwood, stones, my mother's empty spice containers. I had quite the collection until a typhoon took our house when I was 10. His smile faded. "Life rarely cares about our preferences, Miss Swan." "Portia," she said suddenly. "If we're sharing childhood dreams, you might as well use my name." He considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Portia." The way he said her name, carefully, as if testing its weight, sent an unexpected shiver through her that had nothing to do with the storm. They talked for another hour as the candles burned lower, sharing disconnected stories from their pasts. CO spoke of his first visit to New York as a young man, how the city's verticality had rekindled his childhood fascination with architecture. Portia described the first time she performed at Lincoln Center, how the stage had felt both enormous and exactly right. Neither discussed the present, his business, her accident, the strange circumstances that had brought them together. It was as if the storm had created a pocket outside of time where they could simply be two people sharing memories. When the lights suddenly blinked back on, both squinted against the harsh brightness. The spell broken, CO straightened, professional demeanor sliding back into place. "It's late," he said, standing. "Thank you for the meal." Just like that, the boundary between them reasserted itself. Portia cleared the dishes as CO retreated to his wing, their temporary connection fading like the storm moving out to sea. But something had changed. The next morning, when CO emerged for his tea, he greeted her with her name rather than the usual nod. "Good morning, Portia." Small steps. Significant ones. The following week brought a flurry of business meetings to the penthouse. Men in expensive suits filed in and out, their conversations with CO growing increasingly tense. Portia maintained her invisible presence, ensuring refreshments appeared when needed and disappearing when discussions grew heated. After one particularly stressful meeting that ended with raised voices, Portia observed CO standing by the window, unconsciously rubbing his right shoulder. She recognized the gesture. The same spot had bothered him during the storm, though he'd never mentioned it. Later that evening, after CO had retreated to his wing, Portia hesitated outside his door. In her hand was a small jar of arnica balm, the same one Dr. Cho had recommended for her muscle pain. Taking a deep breath, she placed it on the small table beside his door and walked away. The next morning, the jar was gone. CO made no mention of it, but when he reached for his tea, his movements were easier, less guarded. Their unspoken pattern of care had been established, each addressing the other's needs without acknowledgement, maintaining the professional distance while bridging it in small, significant ways. 3 days later, Portia was finishing her evening therapy exercises when her phone rang. The number wasn't one she recognized, but something compelled her to answer. "Hello? Portia? Is that really you? God, I've been trying to track you down for months." The voice hit Portia like a physical force. Maya? Maya Jones had been more than just another dancer in the company. She'd been Portia's closest friend, her confidant during the grueling rehearsals and triumphant performances. After the accident, when Portia had retreated into her pain, Maya had tried to stay connected. But Portia had pushed her away, unable to bear the reminder of everything she'd lost. "Yes, it's me. I finally got your number from that storage company when I was trying to find you. Portia, where have you been? Everyone's been worried sick." Portia sank onto her bed, emotions washing over her in unexpected waves. "It's a long story." "Well, I've got time," Maya said, her familiar determination coming through the phone. "And more importantly, I've got news I think you need to hear." "What kind of news?" Portia asked, wariness creeping into her voice. "The kind that might give you a new direction," Maya said. "There's this center that just opened in Brooklyn. It's a dance therapy program for injured performers. They're looking for people like you, People who understand both the technical aspects of dance and the emotional journey of injury." "Maya, I don't think. Just meet me for coffee. See the place. That's all I'm asking." Maya's voice softened. "I've missed you, We all have. You disappeared, and it wasn't right. You're more than your injury." Something stirred in Portia's chest, a flutter of possibility she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. Outside her door, she heard the soft sound of footsteps passing, CO, returning to his wing for the night. In the past 6 months, she'd begun to rebuild herself in this strange, gilded cage. Perhaps it was time to test those rebuilt parts in the outside world. "Okay," she said finally. "Coffee. But I can't promise anything more." "That's enough for now," Maya said, relief evident in her voice. "Saturday at 10? The place on Bedford Avenue we used to go to? I'll be there." Portia ended the call and sat in silence, processing the unexpected reconnection. For months, she'd avoided anything connected to her former life, afraid of the pain those reminders would bring. But now, sitting in her comfortable room in a penthouse belonging to a man who had somehow seen value in her broken pieces, she felt something like courage stirring. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to honor who she had been while becoming someone new. And maybe that someone could still have dance in her life, just in a different form than she'd imagined. As Portia prepared for bed, she noticed a fresh pot of tea waiting outside her door. The silent acknowledgement brought a smile to her face. Tomorrow, she would need to ask CO for an adjustment to her Saturday schedule. It would be the first personal request she'd made since starting this job. Somehow, she wasn't worried about his response. They'd established a new language between them, one of unspoken understanding and unexpected kindness. And in that language, they were both becoming fluent. Portia was arranging fresh flowers in the entryway when she heard the elevator chime. CO had been away for 3 days, his first business trip since she'd begun working for him. She'd used the time to deep clean areas that usually received only maintenance attention, finding satisfaction in the methodical work. The doors slid open to reveal CO looking more tired than she'd ever seen him. His usual impeccable appearance remained intact, tailored suit without a wrinkle, not a hair out of place, but shadows lingered beneath his eyes, and tension lined his mouth. "Welcome back, Mr. Park," she said, stepping back from the flowers. CO nodded, setting his briefcase down and scanning the penthouse with an appraising eye. "Everything looks in order. There's fresh tea in the kitchen if you'd like some," Portia offered. "And I've prepared a light meal that can be heated whenever you're ready." He paused, seeming to notice the flowers, peonies and eucalyptus in a simple arrangement. "The place feels maintained." Portia recognized the statement for what it was, an acknowledgement that the penthouse felt different when she was there. It was as close to, "I missed your presence," as CO Park would likely ever come. "Thank you," she replied simply. CO reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box, approximately 4 inches square, wrapped in simple brown paper. He held it awkwardly, as if unused to the gesture he was about to make. "I found this while I was away," he said, extending the package toward her. It seemed appropriate. Surprised, Portia accepted the box, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The touch was fleeting but electric, causing her to fumble slightly with the package. "Should I open it now?" she asked, uncertain of the protocol for this unexpected moment. "If you wish." CO's face revealed nothing, but he remained standing there, watching. Portia carefully unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a wooden box of deep cherry wood, polished to a soft sheen. Intricate carvings decorated the lid, a dancer in mid-leap, her form graceful and dynamic despite being rendered in wood. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each detail lovingly executed. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers along the carving. "Open it," CO said quietly. Portia lifted the lid, and soft music immediately filled the space between them, the unmistakable melody of Debussy's Clair de Lune, rendered in delicate, tinkling notes. Inside, a tiny dancer turned slowly on a spindle, arms raised in perfect fifth position. Emotion caught in Portia's throat. This wasn't just any music box, it was a piece that understood her, that honored who she had been. The fact that CO had selected it spoke volumes about how closely he'd been observing her. "I saw it and thought of you," he said simply. "That's all." The casual dismissal of his own thoughtfulness was so characteristic that Portia nearly smiled. "Thank you. It's perfect." CO nodded once, seeming relieved to have the exchange completed. "I have calls to make. I'll take that tea now." And just like that, he retreated to his professional demeanor, picking up his briefcase and moving toward his office. But the music box in Portia's hands told a different story, one of growing recognition and respect between them that transcended employer and employee. That night, Portia placed the music box on her bedside table. After completing her physical therapy exercises, she opened the lid, letting Debussy's gentle notes fill her room. The tiny dancer spun in endless circles, performing the movements Portia's body no longer could. Or could it? On impulse, Portia moved to the center of her room and raised her arms to fifth position, mirroring the figurine. The position was simple enough, one she'd executed thousands of times since childhood. Her body remembered the alignment, the slight lift of the ribcage, the gentle curve of the arms. Encouraged, she moved into a basic port de bras, allowing her arms to flow through the classical positions. Her right leg remained firmly planted, but her upper body swayed with the music, muscle memory guiding her through fragments of choreography. It wasn't dancing as she had once known it, nothing like the technical feats she'd accomplished on professional stages. But it was movement with intent, with artistry. For the first time since the accident, Portia allowed herself to truly feel the music rather than just hear it. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she continued moving, finding modified versions of steps that once had been as natural as breathing. When the music box wound down, she stood in the center of the room, heart pounding not from exertion but from emotion. Something had unlocked inside her, a door she'd kept firmly shut since the accident. She might never leap across a stage again, but perhaps dance wasn't entirely lost to her. Over the next 2 weeks, these evening sessions became Portia's secret ritual. Each night, after completing her prescribed exercises, she would open the music box and move to its melody. Gradually, she incorporated more complex movements, modified turns, small balances, expressive port de bras that told stories without words. Dr. Cho noticed the change during their sessions, raising an eyebrow at Portia's improved flexibility and coordination. "You've been doing something besides our exercises," she observed. "Your body is responding differently." Portia hesitated before admitting, "I've been dancing. Just small movements, nothing that strains the injury." Instead of the caution Portia expected, Dr. Cho's face lit up. "That's exactly what this leg needs, purposeful movement that you're emotionally invested in. The brain-body connection is powerful medicine, Portia. Just be mindful of your limits." Encouraged by the professional endorsement, Portia expanded her evening practice, using the music from her phone to create longer sessions. She found herself smiling more, standing taller. The constant ache of loss that had been her companion since the accident began to soften, replaced by something like acceptance, perhaps even hope. Meanwhile, Sio's business demands intensified. He spent long hours in his forbidden office, emerging with tightened jaw and dark circles under his eyes. Phone calls and rapid-fire Korean often continued late into the night, his voice alternating between controlled calm and sharp authority. Though he never mentioned his work to Portia, the signs of increasing pressure were evident in small ways: the abandoned cups of tea gone cold on his desk, the untouched meals, the occasional sleep-wrinkled suit that indicated he dozed off in his office chair. Without discussing it, Portia adjusted her routines to accommodate these changes. She prepared portable meals that could be eaten cold if necessary. She ensured fresh clothes were always ready, anticipating his needs before he voiced them. When he emerged from particularly tense phone calls, she made herself scarce, understanding instinctively when he needed space. One evening, after Sio had been in his office for over 14 hours, Portia left a tray outside his door containing not just dinner but also a small pot of the muscle tension tea he sometimes prepared for her, along with 2 painkillers and a cold compress. The next morning, she found the tray empty, everything used. No acknowledgement was made, but none was needed. They had developed their own language, one of anticipation and care, expressed not in words but in small, meaningful actions. On Saturday morning, Portia met Maya at the cafe in Brooklyn as promised. The reunion was emotional, both women tearing up as they embraced. "Look at you," Maya said, holding Portia at arm's length. "You look different. In a good way." "Life's been strange," Portia admitted as they sat down with their coffees. "But I'm finding my way, I think." "Tell me everything," Maya insisted. "The last anyone heard, you were crashing on Jennifer's couch, and then, poof. Gone." Portia gave a carefully edited version of her current employment, describing Sio simply as a private businessman who valued discretion. Maya raised an eyebrow but didn't press for details. "And what about you?" Portia asked, eager to shift the focus. "You mentioned something about a dance therapy center," Maya's face lit up. Yes. It's called Momentum. It just opened 4 months ago in that old warehouse space on Water Street. It's specifically for dancers and other performers who've experienced career-ending injuries. Physical therapy with a dance focus? Portia asked, trying to understand the concept. So much more than that, Maya said, leaning forward eagerly. It's about reclaiming movement as art, regardless of physical limitations. There's adaptive technique classes, choreography workshops where people create around their new capabilities instead of fighting against them, even performance opportunities. Portia felt a flicker of interest, quickly followed by apprehension. I don't know, Maya. Being around dancers again. That's just it, everyone there understands loss. No one's judging or pitying. It's about moving forward, not looking back. Maya reached across the table to squeeze Portia's hand. Just come see it. The director, Elijah, was a principal with Dance Theater of Harlem until a car accident. He gets it, P. They all do. Portia thought of her evening sessions with the music box, how even those small movements had begun to heal something inside her. Maybe just to observe, she conceded. Maya's smile was brilliant. Perfect. They have an open house this Wednesday evening. I can pick you up, or I can get there myself, Portia said quickly, not wanting to explain her living situation. Just text me the address and time. After finishing their coffees, Maya insisted they walk a few blocks to Water Street so Portia could at least see the building. The old warehouse had been transformed, its brick exterior freshly pointed, large windows replacing the industrial doors. A simple sign read, Momentum, Movement Arts Center. Through the windows, Portia could see a spacious studio with sprung floors and ballet bars. A class was in progress, participants of varying ages moving through what appeared to be a modified jazz combination. What struck Portia was how diverse their abilities seemed. Some used canes or braces, others had prosthetic limbs, yet all were fully engaged in the joy of movement. Something tugged at Portia's heart as she watched, recognition, possibility, longing. Wednesday at 7, Maya said softly. Just come see. Back at the penthouse that evening, Portia found herself distracted as she prepared dinner. The image of dancers moving despite their limitations kept replaying in her mind. When her phone chimed with a text from Maya confirming Wednesday's details, Portia felt a surge of anticipation she hadn't experienced in months. She was humming softly to herself, chopping vegetables with rhythmic precision, when she realized Sio was standing in the doorway, observing her. You seem cheerful this evening, he remarked, moving to the refrigerator for water. I had a good day, Portia replied, suddenly self-conscious. I met an old friend for coffee. The dancer, Sio said. It wasn't a question. Portia looked up, surprised. Yes. Maya Jones. We were in the company together. How did you know? Your posture changes when you connect with your previous life, Sio observed, leaning against the counter. Your shoulders drop their tension. You move differently. The accuracy of his observation was unsettling. Had he been watching her that closely? Maya told me about a center for injured dancers, Portia said, deciding honesty was the best approach. It's called Momentum. They work with performers who've experienced career-ending injuries. Sio's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with interest. A rehabilitation center? More than that. It's about adapting dance to new circumstances, finding ways to remain connected to movement as art. Portia realized she was speaking more animatedly than usual and tried to modulate her tone. They're having an open house on Wednesday evening. You wish to attend, Sio stated, again not quite a question. Portia nodded, setting down her knife. If that's acceptable with my schedule here. Before Sio could respond, Portia's phone rang, Maya calling to add details about Wednesday. Portia excused herself and stepped into the hallway to take the call. I spoke with Elijah, Maya said without preamble. He's excited to meet you. When I mentioned you were Alvin Ailey, he practically jumped through the phone. Maya, I'm just coming to observe, Portia cautioned, but couldn't keep the excitement from her voice. I'm not committing to anything. Of course not, Maya agreed too quickly. But Elijah mentioned they're looking for someone to help develop their program for younger dancers. Someone who understands both the technical and emotional aspects of dance injury. Your name might have come up. Maya. Portia protested, but found herself smiling. You're incorrigible. Just think about it. This could be perfect, a way to keep dance in your life, to use everything you know to help others. Isn't that better than just? Maya hesitated. Just what? Just being someone's housekeeper, Maya said gently. You're worth more than that, Portia. You always have been. The words stung with uncomfortable truth. As grateful as Portia was for the stability her position with CO provided, it wasn't a future. It wasn't purpose. I'll think about it, Portia promised, her voice softening with genuine consideration. Wednesday at 7. I'll be there. As she ended the call and turned to go back to the kitchen, she nearly collided with CO, who was standing just inside the hallway. From his position, he must have overheard at least part of the conversation. I apologize, he said, stepping back. I was coming to ask if you needed anything from the market. Portia wondered how much he had heard, but his face revealed nothing. No, thank you. I have everything I need for this week's meals. CO nodded, then said, about Wednesday evening. You wish to adjust your schedule to attend this open house. Portia straightened her shoulders. Yes, if that's possible. I would need to leave by 6. Of course. The words came too quickly, almost eagerly, before CO seemed to catch himself. He cleared his throat, adding in a more measured tone, I mean, that can be arranged. I have no dinner guests that evening. The swift agreement surprised Portia. She had expected at least some negotiation, perhaps questions about how her absence would affect the household routine. Thank you, she said, studying his face for clues to his thoughts. It's nothing, CO replied, his professional mask firmly in place once more. But something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, of her need for purpose beyond these walls. As he turned to leave, he added without looking back, I'm glad you found something that makes your voice change that way. What way? Portia asked, genuinely confused. CO paused, one hand on the doorframe. Like music has returned to it. He disappeared down the hallway before Portia could respond, leaving her to wonder exactly how much CO Park saw when he looked at her, and why the thought sent a warm current through her chest that had nothing to do with dancing. The Wednesday open house at Momentum changed everything. CO knew this the moment Portia returned to the penthouse that night, her cheeks flushed and eyes bright in a way he hadn't seen before. She moved differently, lighter somehow, as if gravity had loosened its hold on her. When she spoke about the center, words tumbled out in a rush unlike her usual measured speech. They have adaptive technique classes for all styles, ballet, modern, jazz, even hip-hop, she explained as she made tea in the kitchen, seemingly unaware that it was nearly midnight. And the director, Elijah, he was with Dance Theater of Harlem before his accident. He's created this methodology that focuses on what dancers can do rather than what they've lost. CO leaned against the doorframe, watching her animated gestures. You enjoyed yourself. I did, she admitted, looking almost surprised by the realization. They asked if I'd come back, maybe work with some of the younger participants. And will you? CO kept his voice neutral despite the unexpected tightness in his chest. I think so, Portia said, meeting his eyes directly. Just a few evenings a week. It wouldn't interfere with my duties here. CO nodded once. Your schedule is your own after 7 p.m. As long as household responsibilities are met, I have no objection. Thank you. The simple words carried genuine gratitude. He should have left it there. Should have wished her good night and retreated to his wing. Instead, he heard himself ask, did it feel like coming home? Being around dancers again? The question hung between them, more personal than any he'd asked before. Portia's hands stilled on her teacup. Not home exactly, she said thoughtfully. More like, finding a new room in a house I thought was closed to me forever. Co nodded, understanding more than she might realize. Good night, Portia. Good night, Mr. Park. He noticed she'd reverted to his formal address, a subtle recalibration of boundaries as her world expanded beyond the penthouse walls. The new routine established itself quickly. 3 evenings each week, Portia would leave the penthouse at 6:30 p.m., everything in perfect order before her departure. Initially, she returned by 9:30, but as weeks passed, her absences stretched longer, 10 o'clock, then 10:30, occasionally past 11 o'clock. Co told himself he didn't mind. Her work remained impeccable. The household ran with the same quiet efficiency. If anything, Portia seemed more attentive during her hours at the penthouse, as if energized by her time at the center. Yet something unsettled him about these absences. He found himself glancing at the clock when the elevator chimed her return, noting the time despite his efforts not to care. I know you're wondering what Portia's doing that keeps her out so late. The answer might surprise you, just like it surprises Co. If you're enjoying this journey of unspoken feelings and second chances, hit that subscribe button and comment where you're watching from. The story's about to get even more interesting. 3 weeks into this new arrangement, Co sat in his private office reviewing security footage, a habit born of necessity in his line of work. The building's lobby camera showed Portia exiting at 6:32 p.m., right on schedule. Without conscious decision, his finger moved to the timestamp indicator, fast-forwarding to 10:47 p.m. when she returned, cheeks flushed despite the spring chill, a small smile playing on her lips. He closed the video window with more force than necessary, troubled by his growing preoccupation. What Portia did with her free time was none of his concern. She was an employee, nothing more. Yet he found himself opening the security feed again the following evening, and the next. Each time, he noted her return timestamp, tracking the pattern of her increasingly late arrivals. This has to stop, he muttered to himself one night, staring at the frozen image of Portia entering the lobby at 11:23 p.m., talking animatedly on her phone. The woman on the screen looked different from the quiet, efficient housekeeper who moved through his penthouse. This version of Portia gestured expressively as she spoke, her body language open and energized. Even through the grainy security footage, he could see the transformation in her. It wasn't just professional curiosity anymore. It was something he didn't want to name. Meanwhile, Portia was discovering parts of herself she thought had died in the accident. At Momentum, she started by simply observing classes, then offering occasional suggestions when invited. Soon, Elijah asked her to work one-on-one with a 12-year-old girl named Zoe who had lost her leg to bone cancer the previous year. She's struggling with balance positions, Elijah explained. Her prosthetic is excellent, but she hasn't quite found her center yet. You have such a natural way of explaining technique, would you mind? That first session with Zoe changed something fundamental in Portia. The girl's determination, her fierce desire to dance despite everything she'd lost, mirrored Portia's own journey in ways that made her examine her grief from a new angle. Ballet is all about finding your center and then deliberately leaving it, Portia explained to Zoe during their third session. Even dancers with 2 natural legs struggle with this concept. But how do I find my center when half of me is titanium? Zoe asked, frustration evident in her voice. Portia considered this. Your center isn't in your legs, it never was. It's here, she touched her solar plexus, and here, she touched her mind. The legs are just tools for expressing what's already balanced inside you. Something clicked for Zoe that day. She executed her first clean pirouette since the amputation, her face lighting up with pure joy when she stuck the landing. The triumph in the girl's eyes awakened something in Portia that had been dormant for too long, the unique satisfaction of helping another dancer break through limitations. Soon, Portia was working with 3 different students and assisting with the adult beginner class. Each small victory, a student mastering a modified combination, an adult dancer reclaiming joy in movement, filled a space inside her that had been hollow since the accident. You have a gift for this, Elijah told her one evening as they locked up the studio. The way you translate technique for different bodies, how you see potential rather than limitation, it's rare, Portia. I just understand what it feels like to lose something that defined you, she replied. Exactly. And that understanding is precisely what makes you valuable here. Elijah hesitated, then continued. I'd like to offer you a formal position. Part-time to start, 3 evenings a week plus Saturday mornings. We can't match whatever you're making at your current job, but... I'll think about it, Portia interrupted, not ready to commit but not wanting to refuse outright. As she rode the subway back to Manhattan that night, Portia turned the offer over in her mind. The salary would be modest, nothing close to what CO paid her. But the sense of purpose, the connection to dance in a new form, that was something money couldn't buy. 1 month into Portia's new routine, CO made a decision he knew was inappropriate, perhaps even unethical. But the question of where Portia spent her evenings, and with whom, had become a splinter in his mind, impossible to ignore. He had business in Brooklyn that afternoon anyway, he rationalized. It wasn't a significant detour to drive past the Momentum Center on his way back to Manhattan. Just to see the place. To understand this new element in Portia's life. CO instructed his driver to park across from the converted warehouse at 8:30 p.m., when Portia would typically be mid-session. The building's large windows were illuminated from within, offering clear views of the activities inside. Wait here, he told his driver, stepping out into the cool evening air. From the street, CO had a direct line of sight into what appeared to be the main studio space. He could see maybe 15 people spread throughout the room, working in small groups. It took him several moments to locate Portia among them. When he finally spotted her, he froze, struck by the transformation. She was working with a young girl, maybe 11 or 12, who moved with the distinctive gait of someone using a prosthetic limb. Portia stood beside the girl, one hand lightly supporting her arm as they faced a mirror. Together, they moved through what CO recognized as ballet positions, Portia demonstrating, then watching carefully as the girl imitated. Even from this distance, CO could see the patience in Portia's guidance, the gentle corrections, the enthusiastic praise when the girl executed a movement correctly. But what struck him most was her expression, alive with purpose, focused yet joyful in a way he'd never witnessed in the penthouse. This was Portia as she was meant to be, not serving tea or arranging flowers, but sharing the art that lived in her bones, even if in a new form. The girl attempted a small turn and wobbled. Instead of falling, she laughed, and Portia laughed with her, a sound CO realized he'd never heard before. They tried again, this time with Portia modifying the movement, showing how to adjust for the prosthetic. When the girl completed the turn successfully, her face lit up with triumph, and Portia's answering smile was radiant. CO stepped back from the window, a strange tightness in his chest. He'd come expecting, what? To find her meeting a lover? Involved in something problematic? The reality was both better and somehow more disturbing. Portia wasn't just taking dance classes or casually volunteering, she was transforming lives, including her own. And she was doing it entirely separate from the carefully controlled world he'd created around her. He returned to the car, instructing his driver to take him home. As they crossed the Brooklyn Bridge back to Manhattan, CO stared at the city lights reflecting on the dark water, his thoughts turbulent. In his world, the shadowed realm of power he'd built since his uncle first introduced him to the family business, people were assets or liabilities, allies or enemies. Relationships were transactional, emotions a weakness to be controlled. These principles had served him well, kept him alive when others fell. Yet watching Portia tonight had awakened something he'd buried long ago, a recognition of what it meant to find true purpose, to create rather than control. Her face as she guided that young dancer had been luminous with a kind of joy he couldn't remember ever feeling himself. And beneath that recognition lay another, more unsettling realization. Portia was becoming essential to him in ways that had nothing to do with perfectly pressed shirts or well-prepared meals. He found himself looking forward to their brief interactions throughout the day, storing small observations about her like treasures, how the corner of her mouth lifted slightly when she was pleased with something, how she hummed unconsciously when concentrating on a task, how she always seemed to anticipate his needs before he voiced them. When had his housekeeper become the person he most wanted to see each day? By the time the car pulled into the building's underground garage, Co had composed himself, burying these uncomfortable revelations beneath his usual controlled demeanor. He rode the elevator to the penthouse, which felt strangely empty despite the expensive furnishings and perfect order. In the kitchen, he found a covered plate waiting in the refrigerator with reheating instructions placed neatly beside it. This small gesture of care, now routine, suddenly seemed laden with meaning he wasn't prepared to examine. Co left the food untouched and poured himself a glass of scotch instead, carrying it to the window where he could see the Brooklyn shoreline in the distance. Somewhere in that landscape, Portia was helping a young girl reclaim movement. Meanwhile, he stood in his luxury prison, surrounded by the trappings of power but increasingly aware of all he'd sacrificed to obtain them. The elevator chimed at 11:17 p.m. Co remained at the window, listening to Portia's footsteps as she entered, the soft sound of her jacket being hung by the door, the quiet padding of her sensible shoes across the marble floor. "Mr. Park?" Her voice carried surprise at finding him still in the common area. "I didn't realize you'd be up. Can I get you anything?" Co turned, maintaining careful distance between them. "No. Thank you." Portia nodded, but hesitated instead of continuing to her quarters. "Is everything all right? You seem..." "How was your evening?" he asked abruptly, avoiding her observation. Something like joy flickered across her face before she composed herself. "It was good. One of my students mastered a movement she's been struggling with for weeks." "Your students," Co repeated, the words hanging between them. Portia's chin lifted slightly. "Yes. I've been helping with individual instruction at the center." "I see." He took a sip of his scotch, then added, "You found something meaningful there." It wasn't a question, but Portia answered anyway. "I have. It's healing, in a way. Helping others navigate what I've been through." Co nodded, turning back to the window to hide the conflict in his expression. "Good. That's good." Behind him, he heard Portia shift her weight, probably confused by this unusual conversation. "Well, good night, Mr. Park." "Good night, Portia." Only when he heard her door close did Co allow his shoulders to drop, the mask of indifference falling away. In the reflection of the window, he barely recognized himself, a man caught between the empire he'd built and unfamiliar emotions he had no blueprint for navigating. The walls he'd constructed around himself had served a purpose: protection, control, power. But for the first time, he wondered if they had also become a prison, keeping others out but trapping him within. And Portia, with her quiet grace and newfound purpose, was making those walls feel more confining by the day. Something had shifted in the penthouse's atmosphere. Portia noticed it first in the small details: Co's tea going cold on the counter, meetings moved from the conference room to his private office, the sudden appearance of unfamiliar security personnel in the building lobby. For 3 days straight, Co had been on his phone almost constantly, his voice a controlled murmur behind closed doors. When he did emerge, the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes, though his face remained carefully blank. Twice, she'd heard him speaking Korean in clipped, harsh tones she'd never heard him use before. On Thursday morning, Portia arrived in the kitchen to find Co already there, staring at his phone with such intensity she hesitated in the doorway. "Good morning, Mr. Park," she said cautiously. He looked up, seeming to return from somewhere distant. "Portia." "Yes. Good morning." She moved to prepare his usual tea, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "You're up early." "I haven't been to bed," he replied, rubbing a hand across his jaw where stubble had formed, an unprecedented lapse in his immaculate grooming. Portia set his tea before him, then hesitated. "Is there anything I can do?" The question seemed to surprise him. For a moment, something raw and unguarded flashed across his face before the professional mask slipped back into place. "No. Just maintain your usual routine." He paused, then added, "Though perhaps it would be best if you limited your outings for a few days." Portia stilled. "Limited my outings?" "A business precaution." Nothing to concern yourself with. His tone ended the discussion. That afternoon, Portia noticed two men in suits standing in the lobby when she went downstairs to collect a package. They watched her with subtle but unmistakable attention as she signed for the delivery and returned to the elevator. Neither wore uniforms, but their alert posture and communicator earpieces marked them as security. Back upstairs, she found Sio ending yet another tense phone call in the hallway. The additional security, she said when he'd hung up. Is everything all right? Sio regarded her for a long moment. Business complications. The security is standard procedure. For what kind of business? The question slipped out before she could stop herself. Sio's expression hardened. The kind that doesn't welcome questions. The rebuke was gentle but firm. Portia nodded, understanding the boundary being reinforced. Whatever Sio's business entailed, it operated in shadows, shadows she was not meant to illuminate. I understand, she said. I apologize for overstepping. Something like regret flickered across his face. No, he stopped, seeming to reconsider. Your concern is appreciated. But unnecessary. Focus on your work here, and at the center. Portia nodded, recognizing the rare concession in his acknowledgement of her life at Momentum. Actually, about that, she said. Tomorrow night is a fundraising event at the center. It will run later than my usual sessions, probably until 11 or so. Sio frowned. A public event? Semi-private. Potential donors, supporters of the program, participants, and their families. She hesitated, then added, it's important for the center's future funding. Elijah has asked me to demonstrate some of the adaptive techniques we're developing with the youth program. Conflict played across Sio's features. Finally, he nodded once. Text me when you're leaving the center. My driver will collect you. That's not necessary. It is. His tone left no room for argument. Please. The please surprised her, a request rather than an order. All right. Thank you. The following evening, Portia wore a simple black dress she'd purchased specifically for the fundraiser. As she checked her appearance one final time, she felt a flutter of nerves. This would be her first time formally representing Momentum. Elijah had asked her to speak briefly about her work with the youth program. She found Sio in the living room as she prepared to leave. He looked up from his laptop, his expression changing subtly as he took in her appearance. You look. He paused, seeming to search for an appropriate word. Professional. Thank you, Portia replied, oddly disappointed by the assessment. I'll text when I'm ready to leave, as you asked. Sio nodded, his attention already returning to his screen. Have a good evening. The fundraiser exceeded all expectations. Momentum's main studio had been transformed with string lights and simple decorations. Around 60 guests mingled, watching short demonstrations from various program participants. Zoe and two other young dancers performed a piece Portia had helped choreograph, adapting classical movements to work with their various physical challenges. When it was Portia's turn to speak, she found the words flowing more easily than expected. She spoke about resilience, about redefining rather than abandoning dreams, about finding new paths when old ones disappeared. The faces watching her reflected understanding and admiration. Dance isn't just about perfect bodies executing perfect movements, she concluded. It's about honest expression through whatever vessel we have. At Momentum, we're not teaching despite limitations, we're teaching through them, finding the unique beauty each body can create. The applause was warm and genuine. Afterward, several donors approached her with questions and compliments. One woman, the director of a small foundation focused on arts accessibility, pressed a card into Portia's hand. We should talk about expanding this program, she said. What you're doing here is exactly the kind of initiative we want to support. By the time the event wound down, it was nearly midnight, far later than Portia had anticipated. She texted Sio as promised, expecting his driver to meet her outside. Instead, she stepped out of the building to find Sio himself waiting, leaning against his sleek black car, arms crossed over his chest. His face was partially shadowed, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. "You're an hour later than you said," he stated as she approached. "The event ran long. I'm sorry, I should have updated you." Portia was surprised by his presence. "I didn't expect you to come yourself." CO opened the passenger door without responding to her observation. "It's late. Let's go." The drive back to Manhattan was silent at first. CO focused on the road while Portia processed the evening's success. Finally, unable to contain her excitement, she broke the silence. "They raised over $30,000 tonight," she said. "Enough to expand the youth program and offer some scholarships." CO glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. "That matters to you." "It does." Portia smiled, still riding the high of the event's success. "A girl named Zoe performed tonight, the one with the prosthetic leg I've been working with. 6 months ago, she thought she'd never dance again. Tonight, she brought an entire room to tears." "Because of you," CO observed quietly. "Not just me," Portia demurred. "But yes, I helped her adapt the choreography to work with her prosthetic. To find strength in her difference rather than fighting against it." CO was silent for a long moment as they crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, the city lights reflecting off the water below. "You found your purpose there." It wasn't a question, but Portia answered anyway. "I think maybe I have. It's not what I imagined for myself, but it fills the space that was empty," CO finished for her. Portia looked at him, surprised by his perception. "Yes. Exactly." They lapsed into silence again, but something had shifted between them. When they reached a red light, CO turned to look at her directly. "I was concerned when you were late," he admitted, the confession clearly difficult for him. "With the current situation, timing matters." "What situation?" Portia asked carefully. CO's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Business complications. Nothing for you to worry about." "It must be serious if you're worried about me being an hour late from a dance fundraiser," Portia observed. The light turned green. CO accelerated perhaps a bit too quickly. "I don't like unknowns. That's all." Portia studied his profile, the rigid set of his jaw, the tension evident in his shoulders. "You were worried about me." CO didn't deny it. "These days, I worry about many things." "Is that why there are new security guards in the building? Why you been taking all those calls behind closed doors?" For several blocks, Portia thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully measured. "My business operates in competitive spheres. Occasionally, there are disputes over territory, over method. Usually, these resolve themselves through negotiation. Sometimes, they require more direct intervention." It was the most he'd ever revealed about his work, vague as it was. Portia absorbed his words, reading between the lines. "And right now, there's a dispute that isn't resolving itself," she guessed. CO glanced at her, surprise flickering across his features. "Yes. Is that why you wanted your driver to pick me up? Why you came yourself instead?" They pulled into the underground parking beneath their building. CO shut off the engine but made no move to exit the car. "In my world, Portia, people find leverage wherever they can. They identify what matters and use it to gain advantage." He turned to face her fully. "I have made it a point to have very few things that matter beyond business." The implication hung in the air between them, too significant to be dismissed, too delicate to be addressed directly. "I see," Portia said softly. "I don't think you do." CO's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "But for now, it's better that way." The intensity of his gaze made her heart beat faster. For a moment, Portia thought he might say more, might finally give voice to the current that had been building between them for months. Instead, he broke the connection, turning to exit the car. "It's late," he said, his professional demeanor returning like a shield. "You should rest." In the elevator, they stood side by side in silence, both acutely aware of the conversation that hadn't quite happened. When they reached the penthouse, CO hesitated before turning toward his wing. "Portia," he said, his back to her. "The center. Your work there. You spoke about it differently tonight." "Did I?" "Yes. With passion. With purpose." He turned slightly, his profile outlined against the dim hallway light. "It suits you." Before she could respond, he continued down the hallway, disappearing into his private wing. Portia stood for a moment, processing his words, feeling oddly off balance, as if something significant had happened, though she couldn't quite name what it was. Later, as she prepared for bed, she replayed their conversation. CO had been worried about her. Had come himself rather than sending his driver. Had listened to her talk about momentum with what seemed like genuine interest. These small shifts felt important, though she wasn't sure why they made her heart beat faster when she thought of them. Meanwhile, in his private office, CO stared at the message that had appeared on his phone moments after he'd left Portia in the hallway. The text contained only an image and a line of Korean text. The image showed Portia leaving the Momentum Center earlier that evening, her face clearly visible, the black dress distinctive in the night. The Korean characters translated simply. "The woman who works for you. Pretty. Would be a shame if something happened to her because of your stubbornness." CO's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles turned white. In his years building his empire in America, he had maintained strict separation between business and personal matters. He had no family to threaten, no relationships to leverage. He had kept it that way deliberately, understanding that attachments created vulnerabilities. Yet somehow, without his permission, Portia had become important to him. Important enough that his enemies had noticed. Important enough to use against him. Setting the phone down with controlled precision, CO moved to the hidden safe behind his bookshelf. Inside, beside stacks of cash and various passports, sat the gun he hadn't needed to touch in over a year. The business dispute had just become personal. And CO Park handled personal threats very differently than business ones. As he checked the weapons magazine with practiced hands, one thought dominated his mind: no one would touch Portia. No one would use her against him. He would end this threat quickly and decisively. Because the alternative, losing her, was suddenly, terrifyingly unacceptable. The changes began subtly, but to Portia, who had learned to read CO's unspoken signals over months of working in his home, they were impossible to miss. First came the sleek black sedan that appeared outside the penthouse building the morning after the fundraiser. The driver, a broad-shouldered Korean man who introduced himself only as Jean, stood beside it when Portia emerged for her usual morning errand run. "Mr. Park has arranged transportation for you," he said, his English precise but heavily accented. Portia paused on the sidewalk. "That's not necessary. I'm just going to the market 6 blocks away." Jin's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Park insists. For convenience." The way he emphasized convenience made it clear that arguing would be pointless. Reluctantly, Portia slid into the back seat, feeling strangely conspicuous in the luxury vehicle for such a mundane trip. When she returned to the penthouse, CO was in the kitchen reviewing documents. She set the groceries on the counter with perhaps more force than necessary. "A driver, Mr. Park? For a grocery run?" CO didn't look up from his papers. "Jean will be available to you whenever you leave the building." "That seems excessive." "It's efficient," he countered. "Your time is valuable. This saves you from dealing with subway delays or trying to find taxis." Portia crossed her arms. "And it has nothing to do with your business complications?" CO finally looked up, his expression carefully blank. "Jean is an excellent driver with extensive knowledge of the city. Consider it a job benefit." The discussion was clearly over, but Portia couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more happening than CO was willing to share. That evening, she noticed 2 new security guards in the building lobby. Unlike the usual doormen who greeted residents with friendly smiles, these men scanned everyone with sharp, assessing eyes. One spoke quietly into a communicator as she passed, and she distinctly heard her name mentioned. The following day brought 3 business associates to the penthouse for what appeared to be an emergency meeting. Portia served refreshments as usual, but this time, the men watched her with calculating interest that made her skin crawl. One, an older Korean man with silver at his temples and a scar across his right knuckles, followed her movements with particular intensity. When she entered the kitchen, she overheard a snippet of their conversation in English before they switched to Korean. "And she lives here? In the penthouse?" "That's not your concern," Co replied, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "It becomes everyone's concern if she's a liability, Park. You know how Young operates." The conversation abruptly switched to rapid Korean, Co's voice low but commanding. When Portia returned with fresh tea, the men fell silent, watching her with newfound wariness. That night, as she prepared to leave for Momentum, Co appeared in the hallway. "Jean is waiting downstairs," he said. "He'll remain at the center until your session ends." Portia turned to face him fully. "He's going to sit in a car for 3 hours?" "Yes." "That's ridiculous." "Nevertheless," Co replied, his tone making it clear the arrangement was non-negotiable. Jean drove her to Brooklyn in silence. When they arrived at Momentum, he walked her to the door, a gesture that felt more like security detail than courtesy. Inside, Portia tried to push away her unease and focus on her students. The class went well, with Zoe mastering a new transition that incorporated her prosthetic as a strength rather than a limitation. Afterward, as other students filtered out, Portia noticed a man she didn't recognize speaking with Elijah near the reception desk. Something about his posture, too casual, too studied, triggered her instincts. As she gathered her things, the man approached her with an easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You must be Portia," he said, extending his hand. "I've heard great things about your work with the adaptive program." She shook his hand briefly. "Thank you. Are you interested in the program?" "Very much so." His eyes assessed her with unsettling thoroughness. "I understand you have another job, with a private employer in Manhattan?" The question, so direct and seemingly innocent, sent alarm bells ringing in Portia's mind. "I do have other commitments, yes." "Must be quite something, to work for someone who sends a private security detail to a dance studio." He nodded toward the window, where Jean could be seen waiting by the car. "Important man, is he? Your employer?" Portia kept her expression neutral. "I value my privacy, Mr. Kim. David Kim." He smiled again, but his eyes remained cold. "Of course. Privacy is important. I was just curious about the kind of man who employs such a talented dancer. If you're interested in our programs, I'm sure Elijah can answer any questions," Portia replied, gathering her bag. "If you'll excuse me." As she walked toward the door, he called after her, "By the way, that's a beautiful necklace. Korean design, isn't it?" Portia's hand instinctively went to her throat, where a small jade pendant hung on a silver chain, a gift that had appeared on her dresser after her first month at Momentum, with no note but clearly from Co. She didn't respond, pushing through the door to where Jean waited. "Everything okay, Ms. Swan?" Jean asked, his vigilant eyes scanning past her to the studio. "Fine," she replied, but her heart raced as Jean opened the car door, his body positioned protectively between her and the building. Back at the penthouse, she found Co in the living room, phone in hand, tension evident in every line of his body. "There was a man at the center tonight," she said without preamble. "He asked about you." Co's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "What man? What did he ask?" "He called himself David Kim. He seemed very interested in my important employer who sends security details to dance studios." Portia crossed her arms. "He noticed my necklace too, the Korean jade one." Co was on his feet instantly, moving to stand directly in front of her. "Did he threaten you?" "Not explicitly, no. But it felt like he was sending a message. To you, through me." She met his eyes directly. What's happening, CO? And don't tell me it's just business complications again. For a long moment, he said nothing, studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then he pulled out his phone and rapidly typed a message before returning his attention to her. You should sit down, he said, gesturing to the sofa. Portia sat, her heart pounding as CO paced before the windows, clearly struggling with how much to tell her. The man you met, if his real name is actually Kim, which I doubt, works for someone who wants something from me. Something I'm not willing to give. What does he want? CO's jaw tightened. Control of distribution channels I've spent years building. Territory that belongs to me. Distribution of what? Portia pressed. CO gave her a long look. Are you certain you want those details? The question hung between them, a final chance to maintain the careful boundary between what she knew and what she suspected about his business. I want the truth, she said firmly. If I'm being watched, approached, possibly threatened because of my connection to you, I deserve to know why. CO exhaled slowly, then nodded. Fair enough. He sat across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. My family has been in what you might call import-export for 3 generations. When I came to America 15 years ago, I established new routes for certain goods that bypass traditional channels. Illegal goods, Portia stated, rather than asked. Some, he acknowledged. Others exist in gray areas of regulation. My organization has always operated with discipline, with codes. We don't deal in human trafficking. We don't sell to children. We handle our business quietly, efficiently, without unnecessary violence. Portia absorbed this information, fitting it with the pieces she'd observed over months. And someone wants to take over your operation. A rival organization led by a man named Jung. He's old-school Korean Mafia, believes in making examples of people, in blood debts and public displays of power. CO's expression darkened. He's been trying to force me out for months. First with business pressure, then with threats to my associates. And now? Portia asked quietly. Now he's identified you as someone I... CO paused, seeming to search for the right words. Someone whose safety matters to me. The admission hung in the air between them, closer to a declaration of feelings than anything he'd ever expressed. The driver, the increased security, it's because they're threatening me to get to you, Portia concluded. CO nodded once. I received a photograph of you leaving the fundraiser, with a message suggesting you might be harmed if I continue to resist Jung's demands. Portia felt cold despite the penthouse's perfect temperature. I see. I'm handling it, CO said, his voice hardening with determination. But until the situation is resolved, the security measures are necessary. Jean is former Korean Special Forces. The men in the lobby are from my personal security team. They're very good at what they do. And how long will this last? Portia asked. How long before this Jung decides to do more than just send threatening messages? Not long, CO replied, his expression grim. Things are coming to a head quickly now. Portia stood, needing to move as she processed everything. I should leave, shouldn't I? If I'm not here, they can't use me against you. No. The word was sharp, definitive. CO stood as well, closing the distance between them. Leaving now would make you more vulnerable, not less. Here, I can protect you. My security knows your routines, monitors all approaches. The penthouse itself has measures in place you haven't seen. So I'm just supposed to continue as normal? Pretend I don't know I'm being watched by people who might want to hurt me to manipulate you? Not exactly normal, CO admitted. For now, Jean drives you everywhere. No unnecessary outings. The center. He hesitated. It would be safer to pause your work there until this is resolved. No. Portia's response was immediate. I won't give that up. Not when I've finally found something that matters to me again. CO's expression tightened. Even if it puts you at risk? After everything I've just explained? Even then. Portia lifted her chin. You have your business, your territory that you won't surrender. Well, the center is mine. Those students, Zoe, the others, they're counting on me. It's not the same thing, CO argued, frustration edging his voice. Isn't it? You built something that matters to you, that gives your life meaning. I'm doing the same. Portia took a deep breath. I appreciate your concern, your protection. But I won't become a prisoner, even in a gilded cage like this. They stood facing each other, the tension between them charged with conflicting priorities and unspoken emotions. Finally, CO ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of discomposure. 2 sessions per week instead of 3, he offered, clearly struggling with the compromise. Jean stays inside the building during classes. And you vary your schedule, different days, different times. Portia considered, then nodded. Acceptable. And you text me when you arrive and when you leave. Every time. His eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. Promise me. The request held more emotion than demand, surprising her with its vulnerability. I promise, she said softly. Something shifted between them then, the dynamic altered by this new honesty, this shared understanding of danger. For months, they had maintained careful distances, professional boundaries overlaid with small, unacknowledged kindnesses. Now, facing a common threat, those boundaries had begun to blur. CO took a step closer, close enough that Portia could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, could catch the subtle scent of his cologne. I need you to understand something, he said, his voice low and intense. I have spent my life ensuring I had nothing that could be used against me. Nothing I couldn't afford to lose. It was safer that way. Portia held her breath, sensing the significance of what he was struggling to express. But you, he continued, have become an exception I didn't anticipate. The words hung between them, not quite a confession but more revealing than anything he'd ever said to her. What are you saying, CO? She asked quietly. He exhaled slowly. I'm saying that your safety has become a priority that transcends business considerations. And that. He paused, seeming to choose his words with great care, complicates matters in ways I'm still learning to navigate. It wasn't a declaration of feelings, not exactly. But in CO's carefully controlled world, it was perhaps the closest he could come to admitting that she had become important to him in ways that went beyond professional boundaries. Portia nodded, understanding the weight of what remained unspoken between them. Then we'll navigate it together. CO's phone buzzed with an incoming message, breaking the moment. He checked it, his expression immediately shifting to businesslike focus. My security team has confirmed Kim left the center shortly after you did. They're tracking his movements now. He looked up at Portia again. You should rest. It's been a difficult evening. She recognized the dismissal for what it was, CO retreating to the role he understood, the world he controlled. But something had irrevocably changed between them. The walls he'd built so carefully had cracked, revealing glimpses of the man behind the controlled facade. As Portia turned to go to her quarters, CO called after her softly. Portia. She paused, looking back over her shoulder. The necklace, he said. The jade pendant. In Korean tradition, jade represents protection. I chose it. He hesitated, with intention. The admission, that the gift had been more than a casual gesture, warmed something in Portia's chest. I've never taken it off, she replied simply. Something like satisfaction flickered across CO's face. Good. Don't. As she continued to her room, Portia's fingers touched the smooth stone at her throat. Protection, he'd said. But also, perhaps, a mark of belonging, a silent message that she was under CO Park's care. In the complex, dangerous world they now navigated together, that symbol carried weight she was only beginning to understand. But one thing had become crystal clear, the connection between them had evolved beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship. What exactly it was becoming, neither of them had dared to name. But like the jade pendant, it was something neither seemed willing to relinquish, despite the growing danger surrounding them. 3 weeks passed under the new security protocols. Jean became a constant presence in Portia's life, driving her to the center twice weekly and remaining inside the building during her sessions. CO maintained regular contact through texts, his messages brief but frequent. Each night when Portia returned to the penthouse, CO would be waiting, regardless of the hour. They'd fallen into a rhythm that acknowledged the danger without surrendering to it, a delicate balance of caution and defiance. Neither spoke about the deeper implications of his protectiveness or her willingness to accept it. Some truths remained easier to demonstrate than discuss. On a Tuesday morning in late May, Portia found CO at the kitchen island, reviewing documents while sipping his tea. He looked up when she entered, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Good morning," she said, moving to prepare her own tea. "How did the meeting go last night?" "Productive." His usual cryptic response to business inquiries. "The situation is progressing." Portia nodded, understanding that progressing could mean many things in CO's world. She hesitated before adding, "I wanted to ask you something." CO set down his tablet, giving her his full attention, a courtesy that still surprised her sometimes. "Go ahead." Momentum is holding a small showcase this Friday. Just the students, their families, and some key supporters. Portia focused on stirring her tea, suddenly nervous. "My group, Zoe and the others, will be performing a piece we've been working on for weeks." "I see," CO said carefully, his expression neutral. Portia looked up, meeting his eyes directly. "I'd like you to come." The request hung in the air between them. It wasn't just an invitation to a performance. It was an invitation to cross the boundary between their carefully separated worlds, to acknowledge publicly the connection they'd built privately. Surprise flickered across CO's face before he controlled it. "That would be complicated. Given the current circumstances." "I know." Portia set her cup down. "But you've heard me talk about these students for months. You've supported my work there, even with all the security concerns. I'd like you to see what you've made possible." CO was silent for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "It would be a security risk," he finally said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Jean would be there anyway. And I thought perhaps you could." She hesitated, then forged ahead, "Attend discreetly. No one would need to know who you are." The corner of CO's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Are you suggesting I wear a disguise, Miss Swan?" The formal address was softened by the hint of humor in his voice, a rare sound that Portia treasured whenever it appeared. "Nothing so dramatic," she replied, matching his lighter tone. "Just, perhaps not your usual tailored suit and power stance." This time, CO did smile, brief but genuine. "My power stance?" "You know what I mean," Portia said, feeling her cheeks warm. "The way you carry yourself, it announces your importance. It's very distinctive." "I wasn't aware you'd analyzed my posture so thoroughly," CO observed, his eyes holding hers with unexpected warmth. Portia looked away, suddenly flustered by the intimate turn in conversation. "So, will you come?" CO was quiet for a moment longer, then nodded once. "What time?" 7 o'clock. "The performance begins at 7:30. Portia couldn't quite hide her pleasure at his acceptance. "Thank you." CO regarded her thoughtfully. "It matters to you, having me there." It wasn't a question, but Portia answered anyway. "Yes. It does." Something shifted in CO's expression, a softening around his eyes, a brief vulnerability quickly masked. "Then I'll be there." Friday evening arrived with an atmosphere of nervous anticipation. Portia had gone to the center early to help prepare the students, leaving CO to arrive separately. As she watched Zoe and the others warming up, she found herself glancing repeatedly at the door, wondering if CO would actually come. The small performance space filled gradually with families and supporters. At 7:25, with the showcase about to begin, Portia had nearly convinced herself that CEO had changed his mind. Then, just as the lights began to dim, she noticed a figure slipping into a seat at the back row. If she hadn't been looking for him, she might not have recognized him. CEO wore dark jeans and a simple gray Henley shirt, casual clothes she'd never seen him in before. A baseball cap and glasses completed the transformation. Without his usual tailored suit and commanding presence, he looked almost like an ordinary person rather than a man who controlled a criminal enterprise. Their eyes met briefly across the darkened room. CEO gave a slight nod, and something warm unfurled in Portia's chest. He had come. Despite the risks, despite the vulnerability of being in a public space, he had come because she asked. The showcase began with a short welcome from Elijah, followed by performances from several adult groups. When it was time for Portia's student group, she moved to the side of the stage, heart pounding with an unexpected case of nerves. These weren't her performances anymore, but somehow having CEO witness her teaching felt more intimate than if she'd been dancing herself. Zoe and 4 other students took their positions as the music began, a contemporary piece with classical undertones. The choreography Portia had developed highlighted each student's unique capabilities, turning what might have been seen as limitations into distinctive strengths. Zoe's prosthetic became a focal point for angular movements that contrasted beautifully with the fluid motion of her upper body. A boy with partial paralysis in his right side created asymmetrical shapes that added visual interest to the ensemble work. As they performed, Portia found her gaze drawn repeatedly to CEO. Even from a distance, she could see his complete focus on the stage, his usual mask of indifference replaced by genuine interest. When Zoe executed a difficult turn sequence they'd spent weeks perfecting, Portia saw CEO lean forward slightly in his seat. The piece ended with the 5 students creating a connected shape, supporting each other's weight in a visual metaphor for community and interdependence. The audience erupted in applause, many rising to their feet. Through the blur of happy tears, Portia saw CEO standing with the others, his hands coming together in steady, deliberate applause. After the showcase, while students reunited with their families and Elijah thanked supporters, Portia made her way to where CEO waited near the exit. "What did you think?" she asked, unable to contain her smile. "Impressive," he said quietly. "Particularly the girl with the prosthetic, Zoe?" Portia nodded, pleased that he remembered. "She's worked so hard. It shows." CEO glanced around the crowded space. "They all have. As has their teacher." The simple acknowledgement meant more to Portia than any elaborate praise could have. Before she could respond, Zoe bounded over, still flushed with the excitement of performance. "Miss Portia. Did you see? I didn't wobble at all on the turn sequence." Her eyes darted curiously to CEO. "Is this your friend?" "This is Mr. Park," Portia said, watching CEO's reaction carefully. "He came specially to see your performance tonight." CEO, to Portia's surprise, extended his hand to the young dancer. "You showed excellent control in your movements," he said, his usually commanding voice gentled. "The adaptation you made for the balance sequence was particularly effective." Zoe beamed at the specific observation. "Miss Portia helped me figure that out. She says dancing isn't about having perfect parts, it's about using whatever parts you have perfectly." Something flickered across CEO's face, a brief, unguarded reaction to the wisdom in the child's words. "Your Miss Portia is very wise," he said softly. After Zoe rejoined her family, CEO turned to Portia. "Would you like to walk for a bit? The car is at the corner, but it's a pleasant evening." The invitation surprised her. CEO never suggested unscheduled outings, especially not with the current security concerns. "What about Jean?" "He's aware of the change in plans," CEO replied, nodding toward where the driver stood at a discreet distance. "He'll follow at a remove." They exited the building and turned toward a small park across the street. The May evening was mild, the sky still holding the last glow of sunset. For several minutes, they walked in comfortable silence, Jean trailing some 20 yards behind them. "Thank you for coming tonight," Portia finally said. "I know it wasn't easy, given everything." CO nodded, his hands in his pockets as they followed the park's perimeter path. I'm glad I came. Seeing your work, it clarified certain things. What things? He was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words with care. When I first hired you, I saw someone who had lost their purpose, much as I did, after my parents died. I recognized that hunger to rebuild, to find meaning again. He glanced at her. Tonight, I saw someone who has succeeded. The observation touched Portia deeply. It's still not what I imagined for myself. Few worthwhile paths are. CO's voice held a rare note of reflection. When I came to America, I had certain expectations about how I would build my business. Reality had other ideas. Portia sensed he was sharing something he rarely discussed. What did you expect? CO's laugh was soft, almost self-deprecating. I thought I could build something completely separate from my uncle's methods. Something cleaner, less brutal. He shook his head. But power creates its own demands, its own compromises. They paused at a bench overlooking a small pond. By silent agreement, they sat, the evening air cool against their skin. My uncle took me in after my parents died, CO continued, looking out over the water rather than at Portia. He was already a significant figure in the Korean underworld. He saw potential in me, not as a nephew to nurture, but as an asset to develop. That sounds lonely, Portia said softly. It was efficient, CO corrected, though something in his tone suggested she'd hit a nerve. He taught me to survive, to anticipate threats, to never show weakness. By 18, I was managing part of his operation. By 23, I had enough leverage to break away, come to America, establish my own business. On your own terms, Portia observed. So I believed. CO turned to look at her directly. But systems perpetuate themselves, Portia. The methods I learned, the worldview I inherited, they shaped my choices in ways I didn't always recognize. The admission, so personal, so vulnerable, caught Portia off guard. Why are you telling me this now? CO was quiet for a moment, his gaze intense. Because tonight I watched you help those children create something beautiful from circumstances that might have destroyed them. You didn't just rebuild your own life after your injury, you're helping others transform their losses into something meaningful. He paused. It made me question what I've been building all these years. The confession hung between them, heavy with implications neither was quite ready to voice. Before Portia could respond, CO's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression immediately shifting to alert concern. We need to go, he said, standing abruptly. Now. Portia followed, alarmed by the sudden change. What's wrong? Security alert at the penthouse, CO replied, already signaling to Jean who was moving swiftly toward them. Someone tried to breach the perimeter. Jean pulled the car alongside them almost before CO finished speaking. As they slid into the back seat, CO was already making calls, his voice clipped as he switched between English and Korean. Portia caught fragments, full lockdown protocol, review all camera footage, sweep for devices, that painted a disturbing picture. Was anyone hurt? She asked when he ended the third call. No. The attempt was detected before they gained access to the living quarters. CO's face had transformed completely from the man who had sat beside her moments before. This was the businessman, the strategist, the man whose authority others feared. But they got into the building? Portia pressed. Yes. Which means they had access to security codes that should have been protected. CO's expression darkened. Someone has been compromised. The drive back to Manhattan passed in tense silence. CO made more calls, occasionally glancing at Portia as if reassuring himself of her presence. For her part, Portia tried to process the whiplash transition from the emotional connection they'd shared in the park to this sudden crisis. When they arrived at the building, two unfamiliar security men escorted them directly to the penthouse elevator, bypassing the main lobby. CO kept one hand at the small of Portia's back, a protective gesture that felt both reassuring and intimate. The doors opened to reveal a penthouse in disarray, though not from violence. 3 men in suits were methodically checking every surface, every potential hiding place, while another worked at a laptop surrounded by electronic equipment. "Report," CO demanded as they stepped inside. One of the men straightened immediately. Alarm triggered at 8:17 p.m. 2 intruders, both male, used valid security credentials to access the building. They disabled the elevator security but triggered a secondary system when attempting to override the penthouse entry code. And? CO pressed. They retreated when the alarm sounded. Building security pursued but lost them in the parking garage. The man hesitated. "They knew exactly when the shift change occurred, sir. That information is closely held." CO's expression hardened. "Continue the sweep. I want every inch of this place checked for surveillance devices, trackers, anything that doesn't belong." Portia followed CO to the kitchen, away from the security team. "They were looking for something? Or someone," CO replied grimly. "More likely, they were placing something, listening devices, cameras. Standard intelligence gathering before a more significant move." The implication sent a chill through Portia. "Young's people?" "Almost certainly." CO ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. "This was a message as much as an operation. They're showing me they can get close, that my security isn't as impenetrable as I believe." One of the security team approached them, holding something small between his fingers. "Sir, found this in the main bathroom vent. Audio transmitter, high grade." CO took the device, his expression darkening further. "Check everything. Especially Ms. Swan's quarters." For the next hour, the security team methodically swept every room, eventually discovering 2 more listening devices and a small camera hidden in a living room light fixture. Portia sat on the sofa, watching the systematic search with growing unease. This wasn't just business rivalry anymore. This was invasion, violation of the space she'd come to think of as home. When the security team finally cleared her bedroom, declaring it clean of surveillance, Portia felt a wave of relief followed immediately by determination. She wouldn't allow these faceless threats to terrorize her. Standing, she moved to the kitchen and began preparing tea with deliberate calm, needing to do something normal amid the chaos. CO found her there, measuring leaves into the teapot with steady hands. "You should rest," he said, watching her with a mixture of concern and something like admiration. "It's been a difficult night." "Tea helps me think," Portia replied simply. "Would you like some?" CO studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Please." They sat at the kitchen island while the security team continued their work in the other rooms. Portia poured the tea with the same grace she brought to every task, her movements deliberately unhurried despite the tension surrounding them. "You're remarkably calm," CO observed, cradling his cup between his hands. "Panicking won't help," she replied. "Besides, I had a good teacher in managing difficult situations." The corner of CO's mouth lifted slightly. "Did you?" Portia met his eyes over her cup. "I've watched you handle crises for months now. You never lose control, never let emotion override judgment. And you've learned this skill well," CO said softly, his gaze holding hers. "What happens now?" she asked after a moment. CO set his cup down, his expression turning resolute. "We leave. Tonight." "Leave?" Portia blinked in surprise. "For how long?" "Until I've resolved this situation." CO's voice was steady but held an undercurrent of tension. "I have a property outside the city, more secure, more isolated. We'll go there while my team handles matters here." "We?" The pronoun hung between them, laden with meaning. "Yes, we." CO's eyes held hers, unwavering. "Unless you prefer other arrangements?" Portia considered her options. She could stay with Maya, perhaps, or find a hotel. But the thought of separating from CO now, after everything that had transpired between them, felt wrong somehow. "No," she said finally. "If you think leaving is safest, I trust your judgment. Something like relief flickered across his features. Pack essentials only. Anything else can be acquired later. Portia nodded, rising to follow his instructions. At the kitchen doorway, she paused, turning back to him. CO? He looked up, his face partially shadowed in the dimmed lighting. Yes? In the park, before we were interrupted, what you said about questioning what you've been building. She hesitated. I'd like to finish that conversation, when there's time. CO's expression softened almost imperceptibly. So would I. As Portia packed a small bag in her bedroom, selecting only what couldn't be easily replaced, she found herself reflecting on the events of the evening, the showcase, their honest conversation in the park, the security breach that had followed. Beneath the tension and uncertainty, something significant had shifted between them. CO had allowed her to see beneath his carefully constructed facade tonight, had shared vulnerabilities he likely revealed to no one else. And now they were leaving together, retreating to some unknown property where they would be alone, away from the routines and boundaries that had defined their relationship thus far. Whatever happened next would change everything. Portia could feel it with the same certainty she used to feel before stepping onto a stage, that electric anticipation of a threshold about to be crossed, a new chapter about to begin. 30 minutes later, she rejoined CO in the living room, small suitcase in hand. He stood speaking quietly with the head of his security team, his own bag at his feet. When he saw her, he nodded once, then concluded his instructions to the other man. Ready? He asked as the security team member moved away. Yes. Portia held his gaze steadily. Where exactly are we going? Somewhere safe, CO replied, taking her bag from her hand. Somewhere we can finish our conversation without interruption. The simple words carried a weight that made Portia's heart beat faster. As they moved toward the private elevator that would take them to the garage, CO's hand returned to the small of her back, protective, yes, but also possessive in a way that felt new and significant. Whatever sanctuary awaited them, Portia knew with absolute certainty that when they returned, if they returned, nothing between them would be the same again. Dawn broke over the water, casting golden light across the bedroom Portia had slept in. For a moment upon waking, disorientation gripped her, the unfamiliar ceiling, the sound of waves instead of city traffic, the scent of salt air rather than Manhattan pollution. Then the previous night's events came flooding back, the hurried departure from the penthouse, the tense drive north along the coast, arriving well after midnight at what CO had simply called the house. In darkness, she had registered only impressions, a modern structure of wood and glass perched on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic, surrounded by pine trees and isolation. CO had shown her to this room, his hand briefly touching her shoulder before he'd wished her good night and disappeared down the hallway. Now, in morning light, Portia moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows that formed one wall of the bedroom. The view stole her breath, endless ocean stretching to the horizon, waves breaking on rocks below, and not another building in sight. The house itself seemed to grow from the landscape, all natural materials and clean lines. After a quick shower in the adjoining bathroom, Portia dressed in the simple clothes she'd packed and followed the scent of coffee downstairs. The main living area was a stunning open space dominated by more glass walls that framed the ocean view. CO stood at a sleek kitchen island, dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him in dark jeans and a simple navy sweater. Good morning, he said, looking up as she entered. Coffee? Please. Portia approached, taking in their surroundings. This place is beautiful. CO handed her a steaming cup. It was designed by a Japanese architect who specializes in integrating buildings with nature. I acquired it 5 years ago as a retreat. You come here often? She took a sip of the coffee, rich and perfectly brewed, like everything associated with CO. Rarely. His gaze moved to the ocean view. It serves primarily as a secure location when necessary. This is perhaps the 4th time I've stayed here. Portia absorbed this, another piece of CO's carefully compartmentalized life. Yet you maintain it perfectly. I have staff who visit weekly. He gestured to the fully stocked kitchen. Everything is always prepared for immediate use. The practicality was so characteristic of him that Portia smiled despite the circumstances that had brought them here. Of course it is. CO's phone buzzed on the counter. He checked it, his expression revealing nothing as he read the message. "Breakfast?" he asked, setting the phone aside. "I can prepare something," Portia offered automatically. "No." His response was gentle but firm. "You're not here as my housekeeper, Portia." The simple statement hung between them, acknowledging the shift in their dynamic that had begun the night before. If she wasn't here as his employee, then what was she? Neither seemed ready to define it yet. "Then perhaps we can prepare it together," she suggested. Something like surprise flickered across his features, followed by a nod. "I'd like that." They moved around the kitchen in unexpected harmony, CO retrieving ingredients while Portia heated a pan for omelets. The domestic normalcy of the activity felt surreal after the tension of the previous night, yet somehow right, as if they were discovering a new way of existing in each other's space. Over breakfast, CO explained the security measures at the property: surveillance systems, reinforced entry points, panic room, and guard stationed discreetly at the access road. "We're safe here," he assured her. "My team will handle the situation in the city." "And what about momentum? My students?" Worry creased Portia's brow. "I have sessions scheduled." "Elijah has been informed that you're taking a personal leave," CO said. For security reasons, he wasn't given details. "Jean delivered a message this morning." "And Zoe?" "The showcase follow-up will be rescheduled when it's safe for you to return." CO's gaze softened. "I understand your concern for them. But right now, your safety takes precedence." Portia nodded, accepting the necessity even as she worried about her students. "How long do you think we'll be here?" "A few days. Perhaps a week." CO's expression remained carefully neutral. "My people are implementing certain solutions to our problem with Young's organization." "Solutions that involve violence?" Portia asked directly. CO considered her for a long moment, as if weighing how much to share. "Not if it can be avoided. Contrary to what you might believe about my business, I prefer strategic pressure over brute force. Violence attracts attention, creates unpredictable consequences. But you're not ruling it out." "No." His honesty was unflinching. "If it becomes necessary to protect what matters, I'll do what needs to be done." "What matters?" The phrase echoed between them, laden with meaning neither had fully articulated. The day passed in a strange suspended state. CO worked remotely, taking calls and reviewing documents on his laptop while seated at a desk overlooking the water. Portia explored the house, a mixture of minimalist design and unexpected warmth, with an impressive library and even a small gym equipped with a bar and mirrors. In the late afternoon, CO found her there, watching as she completed a modified version of her daily exercises. "There are trails along the bluff," he said when she finished. "Would you like to walk before sunset?" The invitation felt significant, not just a suggestion of activity but an offer to share space outside the confines of work and obligation. "I'd like that very much." The path wound through wind-sculpted pines before emerging onto open headland, the ocean spread before them in dramatic panorama. They walked in comfortable silence, the only sounds the crash of waves below and the cry of gulls overhead. After the constant buzz of Manhattan, the natural quiet felt almost sacred. "It's so peaceful here," Portia said as they paused at a wooden bench overlooking the water. "I can see why you keep this place, even if you rarely visit." "I've always appreciated the ocean's indifference," CO replied, his gaze on the horizon. "It reminds me that our human concerns are temporary, our conflicts insignificant in the larger scheme." That's a surprisingly philosophical perspective for a businessman. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Perhaps there's more to me than business." "I've always thought so," Portia said quietly. CO turned to look at her then, something unguarded in his expression. Before he could respond, his phone rang, a specific tone that made him immediately alert. "I need to take this." Portia nodded, watching as he stepped away to answer. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his posture as he listened intently, occasionally speaking short phrases in Korean. When he returned, his expression was unreadable. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Let's head back," he replied, not answering directly. "The temperature drops quickly after sunset here." They returned to the house in silence, Seo clearly preoccupied with whatever news he'd received. Dinner was a quiet affair, takeout delivered by one of the security staff from a restaurant in the nearest town. Seo remained distracted, checking his phone frequently. It wasn't until later, when they sat in the living room with glasses of wine, firelight playing against the darkened windows, that Seo finally spoke about the call. "Jung has been removed as head of his organization," he said without preamble. "His second-in-command has agreed to our terms for territorial division." Portia set her wine glass down. "Removed, meaning?" "Meaning," Seo said carefully, "that certain financial irregularities in his operation were brought to the attention of his partners and suppliers. His position became untenable." "You didn't have him killed," Portia stated rather than asked, relief evident in her voice. "As I said, violence creates unpredictable consequences." Seo's expression remained calm, but something like approval flickered in his eyes at her perception. Sometimes information, strategically deployed, is more effective than force. "So the threat is over? We can return to the city?" "Yes." Seo took a sip of his wine. "Though I've suggested waiting another day, to ensure the transition of power in Jung's organization stabilizes. My security team is still verifying that all surveillance has been removed from the penthouse." Portia nodded, processing the information. "And then everything goes back to normal? I return to being your housekeeper, you return to your business?" The question hung between them, weighted with all that had shifted in their relationship over the past 24 hours. Seo set his glass down, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight as he regarded her. "Is that what you want? To return to how things were?" "No," Portia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I do." Something changed in Seo's expression, a softening, an opening. "Neither do I. This moment right here, where everything changes, is why stories matter. If you're feeling the emotion of this scene and want more stories that touch your heart, please hit subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Your support means everything." Morning dawned clear and bright, the ocean a brilliant blue beneath an cloudless sky. Portia woke early, drawn to the spectacular view outside her windows. After dressing, she found the house quiet, no sign of Seo downstairs. A note on the kitchen counter informed her he had gone for a walk and would return soon. Coffee in hand, Portia stepped onto the wide deck that wrapped around the house. The air was crisp with salt and pine, the sun warm on her face despite the early hour. She followed the deck to its farthest point, where it extended like the prow of a ship over the bluff edge. That was where Seo found her 20 minutes later, standing with her face tilted toward the sun, eyes closed, absorbing the peace of the moment. "You look like you belong here," he said quietly. Portia turned, smiling at the sight of him. Something had shifted in his demeanor overnight, a subtle relaxation, as if a weight had been set down. "It's easy to feel that way in a place like this." Seo moved to stand beside her at the railing, his shoulder nearly touching hers as they both gazed out at the water. "I've been thinking about our conversation in the park," he said after a moment. "About questioning what I've been building all these years." "I remember," Portia replied softly. "When I came to America, I had ambitions beyond just continuing my uncle's business model. I wanted to create something that could eventually transition into legitimacy." Seo's voice was reflective, his usual guard lowered. "Over time, that ambition became secondary to survival, to competition, to proving myself in this new territory." Portia remained silent, sensing he needed to express these thoughts without interruption. "Watching you these past months, how you've rebuilt your life after losing what defined you, it's made me reconsider those original ambitions." He turned to look at her directly. "You've shown remarkable courage, Portia. Not just in surviving your loss, but in creating something meaningful from it." "It wasn't courage so much as necessity," she said. "I had to find a way forward." That is courage, Co insisted gently. The refusal to surrender to circumstances. I recognized it in you from the beginning, that determination beneath your grief.